Let's see how we do in the lecture today. I'm usually super ambitious and I want to cover so much material. I think we might not cover it all in just this class, so there might be one more to kind of conclude this series of theory classes. But the good news, or maybe the good news for you, I think the good news for me, because I'm enjoying this, is that we will definitely continue these theory conversations. I'm starting to get over my fear of online streaming classes, and so I think we'll continue with this. I think it's great. I'm really enjoying hearing everyone's responses, and I think each class I get a little more feedback, and it's just lovely to hear your thoughts and hear about what aspects of the conversation confuse you and what aspects inspire you, or questions that come up. There was a really good question that came up from the last theory class, and I want to mention it within the lecture. So definitely don't feel shy to write me an email and share your thoughts or your questions, even if it's kind of a rhetorical question and you don't need a specific answer, but just some thoughts that are being stirred up. I think it's really helpful to, to focus, for me to focus the material for the next class. So I want to continue these theory classes, but we'll kind of try to wrap up our subjects in this class and next class, and then we'll have these available as a bundle, which you can access later once we get it all uploaded. There's been some pretty thick discussion, I would say. There's been some pretty good discussions in these theory classes, so I think it's definitely worth going through again and again. And those of you who have been studying with me know that we can hear these subjects again and again and discuss the topics and the viewpoints again and again, and we just keep finding new layers. So we are on this journey that started from just defining what Indian aesthetics are, and then we took a pretty serious dive into the study of Indian aesthetic theory when we broke down the theory of bhava and rasa. And from there, we went in really skimming the surface of the kind of the methodology in the theory. It's definitely like, I usually describe it just casually, the theory of bhava and rasa, as our acting technique in Indian classical dance. It's the theory of our technique, and how we discuss the quality of an artist is in the context of this theory of bhava and rasa. And we know that rasa is the qualifier of a work of art. So are there degrees of beauty? I don't know. That's very subjective. That's for you to answer. I think we all, Annabella had asked the question of like, oh, have I failed at a rasika if I can't appreciate a work of art somebody else has? And we kept coming back to this point that art is very subjective. And so I certainly, as a rasika, I have, let's just say my favorite music. And there's some music I like more than other music. And then there's, different situations that bring out my love of certain music. Or, you go back and you reread a novel that you read maybe as a teenager, and then you read it as an adult and you realize, oh, this is so rich. Like I didn't have the maturity before to find the rasa in this. And now I have this life experience that enables me to basically, I don't know if it's extract the more rasa or just notice that there is more rasa there. So it's a really subjective experience. So last week we talked a little bit about, we're kind of moving forward from the Navarasa, the 9 sthai bhavas, or the 9 main rasas with corresponding bhavas in Indian aesthetic theory. And we know that the Natya Shastra is kind of our main source of all of this theory. The Natya Shastra mentions 8 rasa, 8 bhava, 8 rasa. And the 9th rasa, Shanta rasa, was added by Abhinavagupta, a Kashmir Shaivite philosopher, something like 1,000 years ago. I can't remember the date, but it was added later to the theory of the Natya Shastra. So kind of from there, we took this turn towards Shringara Rasa, and we started to mention it last class. So during that thunderstorm, I was focused on love in separation. So we know that the Natya Shastra mentions there are 2 banks to the river of love, and they are Sambhoga and Vipralabdha. So Vipralamba is the love in union, love in separation, Sambhoga and Vipralamba. So we mentioned that, and now I'm on the other bank in union. So I'm just going to jump in from where we left off. I have my notes from the last part of the lecture. So I don't think I started to define this, but when I think about love and India, I remember years and years and years ago when I was studying Hindi, and my teacher, it was in university, he explained in Hindi, he mentioned there were 5, and now I wonder why he mentioned there were 5 words for love in Hindi, or used in the Hindi context, because not all of them are actually Shuddh Hindi. So there's many words for love actually in Indian languages, and Hindi being kind of one of the more prominent languages taught today, but in North India, and one of the national languages of India. So within Hindi, you also have this, I mean, just because of the history of India, you have this other mix of languages coming in. So as we know from the Mughal Empire and the Mughal times, we have this heavy Persian influence, which also brought in Arabic. So we have a language known as Urdu. So Urdu is mixing in Persian and Arabic and mixing it with Sanskrit. Hindi is more Sanskrit based. So I was actually looking it up again, the words for love in Hindi, and depending on what dictionary you look at, there's some of them had about 30 or 40 different words, and some of them had 10 or 11, and some were kind of mixing in other concepts. So just a few of the top names of love used in Hindi. We have prema. So prema is like love and devotion. It's also defined as interest. It's very soft and very sweet. There's also another word, priya. Priya is defined to be love, but it's usually a little bit lighter. We use priya in the context of something which is lovely. And then you have preeti. Preeti is affection and endearment, fondness, and then you have pyar. Pyar is often like what we call I call my husband pyar. It means love, affection, devotion. And then you have vatsalya, which we know from our philosophical context is often in relation to mother and child. So it's like a very affectionate kind of love, a very tender kind of love, as well as sneha, which is often associated with parental love. And then you have a word that comes in around love, although, I mean, some dictionaries define, give the definition as love. It's a word that actually, I don't know, I feel like more clearly is defined as pleasure, but the word kama. So kama Many of us know this, like Kamadev, the Cupid of India, the Lord of Love. So Kama can mean love, lovely, pleasure, desire, longing. So it kind of gets more into the, like the, I don't know, kind of the juice and the experience of love, that longing and sensory enjoyment, emotional attraction, and even aesthetic pleasure. And then you have these beautiful words that come from Urdu, ishq. Ishq, often you'll hear it. I love Qawwali music. So in Qawwali, Sufi Qawwali music, you often hear this word, ishq. It's a passionate love, very passionate love. And so Qawwali being a Sufi music, it's often based on the theme of this intoxication, this all enrapturing passion for God. And muhabbat, these are also words you hear a lot in Bollywood songs. So if some of you are, maybe Bollywood dancers or Bollywood music listeners, you've heard these words. It's muhabbat also kind of implies intoxication. Urdu is, I don't speak Urdu, but it's one of my dreams to really study Urdu just so I could read the poetry, because it's very, very rich, very passionate language. The poetry is very famous. So these words carry that poetry with them. But I just think it's so interesting that we, there's all these words for these different kind of degrees of love and different experiences inside of love. And here we are stuck speaking about love with just one little word, 4 letters, love. Just feels like, I don't know, couldn't English come up with some better ones? Maybe I'm missing some words in the English language. So if you know other words for love that are maybe out of practice, then feel free to teach me some English and share these words with me. But I just think that's interesting. You kind of enter into this Indian psyche when you understand how many words there are for love, and already it's getting into the different relationships of love. Okay, so I mentioned last time that there is no life without Shringara Rasa. There is no life without Shringara Rasa. That is certain. Creation comes from Shringara. And so many would argue that this is the rasa that actually brings all other rasa about. As we know, Abhinavagupta, for example, argued that Shanta rasa was the kind of base rasa in which all other rasa arises, which is really interesting. And, the fun thing about studying philosophy is sometimes you get into maybe a philosophical debate and you kind of feel like, well, both perceptions are pretty accurate. So he's saying in Shantarasa, only when you are deeply kind of in that silence within yourself, in that meditative state, only in that Shantarasa state can other rasas arise. So remember, as I broke down the theory of Bhava and Rasa, I was saying that essentially the skill of the actor and the technique of the actor is to go to the stage and to completely stop the fluctuations of the mind, to enter into this yogic state of concentration. It's, whether we call it yoga or not, we all have experienced concentration. And in that silence, bhava arises, because bhava is not cluttered thought waves. It is a state, an expansive state which opens up within us, which is something deeper than what we often refer to as emotions. So that being Abhinavagupta's perspective, this is kind of taking another viewpoint that Shringara Rasa is the rasa which brings all other rasa into creation, because love is creation. And so that's what we're exploring here. And it's where this lecture is going is to focus in on specifically the Vaishnav perspective of art and Shringara Rasa. And I will explain what Vaishnavism is if you're not familiar with it. Definitely, I am surrounded by Vaishnavism, although I don't claim to be an expert on it. So if any of you are practicing Vaishnavs and I speak something in error, then I'm definitely interested to learn. But I just want to share my own experiences with it because I am deeply invested in a Vaishnav art form, which is Odissi. And Odissi expresses quite perfectly the essence of this spiritual philosophy, this religion, if you want to call it that, or this sampradaya. So Vaishnavism is essentially, here we're talking about the love between Radha and Krishna as the supreme relationship and understanding of how to connect with the divine. So we're talking about Shringara Rasa, but then we'll start to specifically filter that through Vaishnav eyes. Because I think if we can understand that, we can really find so much more appreciation in popular classical music of India, classical dance forms of India, the most profound poetry of India. A lot of it is centered around this Vaishnav perspective. So that's where we're headed. Okay, so I mentioned that the experience of rasa is often the experience of rasa is kind of a two-part experience. And so how you portray a rasa would be how it is seen on oneself and how it is perceived by another. So for example, karuna rasa, the pathos, the tragic or the pathetic. So you have the pathetic character and then you also have the empathetic character. So I use the example of Jesus on the cross, the scene of Jesus on the cross, and then Mother Mary at the feet of the cross, the foot of the cross. And so you have both are in karuna rasa, but experiencing it from different sides. And similarly, Shringara rasa is experienced as to love and to be loved, to be the beloved. And I read a little bit from the, I'm going to share you the link right now. I read from, where is it? Aesthetic Vedanta last time. And I found there's a PDF version available for free. Oops, I sent it to you twice. So it's an incredible book, really beautiful book, really poetically describing Vaishnav philosophy and the philosophy surrounding Krishna and specifically around the Ras Lila. So I read a little bit from that book to kind of set us up with this idea of the reason that the reason that Krishna exists is God wanting to experience that experience of himself. So Krishna, it is said that Krishna from his heart manifests Sri Radha. So Radha is an expansion of Krishna. And the reason is that love is only experienced in two parts. And God, I think in any context is often, we could say God is love. And love is not complete unless there is the two parts of the equation, the love and the lover and the beloved. So it's said in the Vaishnav philosophy that he expanded himself through Radha so that love could be experienced, so that love would come into existence. And so love experienced in two parts. When we talk about Shringara Rasa, I just want to kind of review what we had established a few classes before. So when I'm creating a work of art on Shringara Rasa, if we go through the steps of developing rasa in a work of art, just to remind you, we don't just go to the stage and you know, as to create a powerful play, a very powerful presentation, a love story, a masterpiece love story. We were using the example of Romeo and Juliet because most people know that story. It's not that Romeo comes to the stage and he's just saying, "Oh, I love you, I love you, I love you. Oh, you're beautiful," and that's it. It's not just lovely, lovely, lovely. There's all these twists and turns, and that's why it's so good. That's why it's that mixing of spices that creates a delicious dish, and that's how the Natya Shastra explains it, is in the context of cooking, giving that analogy. So the different spices in creating Shringara Rasa would be determinants, which are the vibhava, and these are like the springtime atmosphere, the flowers, moonlight, jewelry, beautiful clothes. These were some of the determinants mentioned in Natya Shastra. Then the consequence, which are the anubhavas, and these are the reactions on the body, like smiling, like eyebrows moving, sweet words, sidelong glances. And then you have the sthai bhav itself, the sthai bhav meaning permanent, and bhava and rasa being inseparable, so the cause and effect. And the bhava of Shringara is rati, it's called rati. Rati bhava creates Shringara rasa. And from there you have Vyavichari bhava, also known as Sanchari bhava, which are the transient emotions in love, such as fear, languor, jealousy, yearning, dreaming, and so on. And then you have the involuntary emotions, Sattvika bhava, such as tears, trembling, fainting, and all of these involuntary kind of symptoms of the rasa. So we mentioned types of love, and I started to mention these, but we'll go more in depth in this class. Vatsalya being mother and child relationship, Shringara being predominantly a relationship between man and woman, a romantic relationship, and then bhakti being devotion. So bhakti being a rasa, which is not included in the Navarasa, but a very, very important concept in Vaishnavism. Bhakti being an aesthetic emotion or a bhava, a rasa, which comes out of Shringara rasa. So before we get into the rich tradition of Shringara from the Vaishnava perspective, I want to kind of lay out some really general concepts of Shringara rasa that we find in Indian art. And I think this is such a fun topic because we just kind of come up against these really polar viewpoints of maybe Christian perspective of sensuality versus the Hindu or the Vedic perspective of sensuality, romance, sexuality, and basically just experiencing the body, really experiencing the body as a process to achieving union with the divine. And that was actually a question after the first theory class that Janice asked me I hadn't gotten to yet because I knew we would come to this point. So hopefully this addresses some of her questions. So basically, you know, we're exploring this to understand why is Shringara Rasa the perfect subject for art. I mean, obviously it's just the best subject. We love a good love story. We just love it more than a disgusting story, right? I mean, usually if I gave you a list of the 9 rasas and said, pick a rasa, hear a story about, you're probably not going to pick the disgusting one. So we all love a good love story. We enjoy it. And because there's so much variety in it. And you know what? It's because it's something we all experience. And I think we all experience it in different degrees. So maybe, the deepest love you felt in your life is with your mother. And the deepest love someone else felt in their life is with their child. And the deepest love another person felt in their life is with God or with Guru. Or maybe the deepest, it's so different for everybody, but everybody has experienced it. So why is Shringara Rasa such a good subject? Well, let's discover kind of why it's the perfect analogy for Indian art, because we know, as we've been explaining theory class after theory class, that all art in India is spiritual in nature because of all this underlying, worldview perspective of the very purpose of life according to the Vedas. We are speaking about Indian aesthetics. And what I mean by Indian aesthetics, in India today, there's many different religions and philosophies in practice. There's many different viewpoints, obviously. It's a highly intellectual country. So there's many viewpoints. But when I speak about Indian aesthetics, I'm talking about classical Vedic viewpoint, which aligns with perspectives described through the Vedas, the Upanishads, Puranas, and all of the Sanskrit literature that kind of comes out of that. So let's talk about polarity and paradox. So we have the macrocosmic, or the divine realm, and the microcosmic, or the human personal realm. And I'm kind of reading or summarizing some thoughts from this Susan Schwartz book on rasa. Look how thick it is. It's a perfect book to start with. You have no excuse. So it's a great little book. A lot of universities require it. It actually comes in a series with 2 other wonderful books. One is Darshan by Diane Eck, and then the other one is something about mantra and sound. So I'm reading and summarizing some of what she presents in this book. So she's talking about macrocosm, microcosm, the divine realm and the human realm, and this division of life and art into categories based on binary opposites is something that how we're used to kind of viewing this. The sacred and the profane, the celestial and the terrestrial, the religious and the mundane. These are all differentiated categories, but in the context of Indian aesthetics, they're always viewed in a relationship together. So meaning that they're complementary instead of polar. So this is something that's very unique and also maybe very difficult to understand when we first enter into Indian aesthetics, is that how can something be viewed as what a Christian would call sacred and profane? How can something as profane as a sexual act or union be considered sacred? How is that even possible? But the idea of celestial and terrestrial, the land of the gods and the land of us humans, it's a microcosm macrocosm relationship. They're one in the same, so complementary rather than polar. And this is an important element to understand about the world of art that we're discussing. The fact that the sensuous can actually be devotional and spiritual, and that the physical can be metaphysical. I mean, that the physical the physical experience can happen simultaneously with the spiritual experience. A path through bodily experience towards ultimate and religiosity defines the transcendence. So this transcendence that happens through the bodily experience is what I wrote about it recently in this article on yoga, short article on yoga that I wrote that's on my website, how we're using the body. By using the body, we can transcend the body. So this is like the premise of Vinyasa Krama Yoga, in that we are controlling the mind, controlling the breath, so that we can transcend the body. So it seems ironic that we're trying to transcend the body, but we're using the body to transcend the body. But actually, it's a common theme that comes up in these Vedic practices and these Vedic philosophies. So speaking about the sacred and the profane, sacred and profane, meaning the sacred or the sacred and the secular. So profane would mean something which is not sacred, and it comes from, it's a Latin word which means outside the temple precincts, which I thought was really interesting. Pro meaning before, and phanam meaning temple, so outside of the temple, and secular meaning non-religious. So the sacred and profane generally are considered two modes of being in the world. And there's a famous book called The Sacred and the Profane, which maybe some of you have read in your university courses. It is a very popular text, obviously about this very subject. And one of the quotes from this book is that the abyss that divides the two modalities of experience, the abyss that divides the two modalities of experience are the sacred and the profane. So what's talked about in this text is, by manifesting the sacred, any object becomes something else, yet it remains itself. For example, if a stone is a sacred stone, it's still a stone, but it has transcended itself to become a sacred stone. So it becomes something else, yet it remains itself. So profane, a profane or mundane object remains itself, and a sacred object, it transmutes to a supranatural reality. So it's almost like another reality expands out of this object, which obviously is a very subjective reality, a non-material reality. So I remember a situation like that really demonstrates this. I remember the first year I was in India, I was at a friend's house, and it was a cold winter's night, and we were sitting around a fire, and I put my feet up on the edge of the kind of, the rocks, the fire pit, because my feet were cold. I wanted to warm my feet by the fire. It seems like a logical thing to do. And everybody kind of freaked out, like, oh, what are you doing? Get your feet down, get your feet down. And everyone was so disturbed by it. And I just could not figure out what was going on. And of course, in those days, I didn't speak one word of Odia or English, Hindi, and nobody spoke much English. So basically, after a long discussion, I realized that they were trying to tell me that fire is sacred, Agni. Agni is one of the actually early Vedic gods. Fire is sacred. So it was like I just put my feet up on an altar of God, and they were just horrified by that. And I remember thinking, like, it's just a fire, right? So it's when an object, a fire becomes something more than fire, more than the physical thing. So the sacred often defines what is considered real, and profane the unreal, right? Because in all of this philosophy, we're talking about the real, ultimate reality, the supreme divine energy, which is kind of like this ultimate truth that we're all aiming to reach. And everything else, especially in this Vedic context, is considered to be unreal. So early on, we defined a term known as Maya. Maya is illusion. So everything that is material or mundane, like the rock, oh, it's just a rock. Why? It's not sacred. It's just a rock. This is actually, in the context of India, in the Indian thought, it is, the rock is the unreal. What is sacred about that rock is the real. So the sacred and the profane work in proximity to each other. The two contrast each other, and the experience of the profane space is in direct contrast with the experience of the sacred space. So in the Indian worldview, in this Vedic worldview, there are these polarities that we find in, for example, the Christian worldview, but they don't suggest the same juxtaposition. It's not quite as black and white. So we have words in Sanskrit like lokika and alokika. Lokika would be worldly, and alokika would mean otherworldly. There's often you hear the phrase lokika and agamika. So the agamas are the sacred texts. So you have worldly and of the sacred texts, right? And then another one that you hear in, in studying philosophy and studying art in the Vedic worldview, you hear drishtartha and adrishtartha. So it means that which is seen or revealed and that which is unseen or unrevealed. So moving on to the topic of the sensuous. Sensuality is certainly a part of shringara rasa. Shringara, the word love certainly implies the sensuous experience. We experience love through the senses. In fact, we experience all the rasas through the senses. But as I mentioned, nobody wants to hear a disgusting story and feel the gag reflex. I mean, if I announce on Facebook, next week we're going to talk about the disgusting for 2 hours, and I hope to make you vomit in this class, I don't think you would tune in. But if I say we're going to talk about shringara rasa and sensuality, then everyone would say, ooh, I'm going to tune in. So the sensuous. So anyone who has been to India or witnessed even any of the performing arts of India, festival of India, heard the music of India, everyone would agree that it's a super sensuous culture. There's so much color. There's so much visual stimulation, so many sounds, so many scents, tastes. The food has so many spices. It's super sensuous. I mean, the ultimate. I don't think there's any other food in the world that puts quite so many spices in one dish. I'll never forget, once I went to this incredible Lakshmi temple in South India, and I can't remember the name of the temple because I was on a pilgrimage and we were going to like 3 temples a day. And we got this incredible opportunity to get into the sanctum sanctorum while they did Abhishek on Devi. And so I was there with my guru, and this was in the inner sanctum. This was a very special worship of Divine Mother that happened once in a year. It was like we had arrived there specifically because there was a moment, an astrological juncture that was an auspicious time. So this ritual took place, and basically it's bathing Devi in all these precious materials. So it was milk, honey, yogurt, sugar, ghee, and bananas. So this mixture was mixed, and the priests were mixing it with their hands, in this silver bowl, and her body was bathed with um, this, anointed with this sweet and succulent mixture, and there was chanting, and they were waving the lamps, and this was more than 10 years ago, so I hadn't been involved in many temple rituals up until this point. It was a very distinct moment, a very, very distinct experience for me. And as her body was being bathed with this sweet, sticky honey, ghee, yogurt mixture, they were rubbing her body with this mixture and waving the lamp and chanting, and all these things were happening. And meanwhile, the floor was kind of filling up with this sticky mixture, and the banana, I specifically remember squishing between my toes, and the honey kind of squishing around, and it was like such a sensuous, like the chanting was vibrating through my ears, and the smell, and the dark sanctum in this very dark stone inner sanctum room, and the waving of the lamp. It was just like so much sense happening in that moment, that you couldn't help but be so involved in that ritual and that experience. So to me, these moments of like having this holy prasad squished between my toes, to me this is India. And when you see like Holi festival or a classical dance performance, you can just understand how much importance is put on the senses, on flooding the senses, to deepen the experience. So many sources of Sanskrit literature borrow imagery from the erotic experience of physical union to describe the indescribable bliss of spiritual union. So constantly, again and again in various different texts, you find that sensual experience being used as the analogy of union with the divine. And also you even see it, for example, in Sufi poetry, the lover and the beloved, this analogy, maybe not as graphic as some Indian traditions, but certainly alluding to that, the romance and the intoxication. So sexuality has never been forbidden or unmentionable in the Vedic context. Rather, erotic imagery has been used in all its nuance to assist the devotee to stretch their imagination to the eventual spiritual union that awaits them. So rather than considering this very abstract philosophical proposal of the Atman, the individual soul uniting with Brahman, the supreme ever-present soul, we have this analogy of Radha and Krishna uniting. And I just remember at the beginning of this lecture series, I was talking about the Atma uniting with Brahman, and the responses I got from that week were like, yeah, my head is spinning, but I enjoyed the class. So it just goes to show you, it's so abstract that there's very few of us who can actually, hold that conception, because it's just so immaterial. But if we talk about love, like the love of God, just like the love of man and woman, then it's just so much easier to relate to. It's that your head isn't spinning as much, or maybe head isn't spinning in quite the same way. So sensuous and even erotic imagery is believed to be appropriate for the spiritual conversation, such as the imagery of Radha and Krishna. So in contrast, the Christian, the story, like the Bible's perspective on sensuality is kind of demonstrated through the story of Adam and Eve, and that the body and sensuous acts are inherently sinful, and the act of sinning would take one farther away from the path of God, rather than progressing them on their path towards God, whatever that means. So I thought, there's a word that comes up a lot in Indian art, in India in general. If you've been to India, you hear this word auspicious. You hear this word auspicious a lot. And many times in my life, I've come back from India, I'm from America. I've come back, and in a conversation, I'll say, "Oh, it was so auspicious," da, da, da. And someone will say, like, what are you talking about? What is auspicious exactly? Like, what are you trying to say? Because auspicious is an English word, but it's not really used a lot anymore. And it's kind of viewed as like this, I don't know, this old world word. I think that's pretty sad because auspicious is a beautiful concept. So just kind of creating a little context around this and why something like sensuality or sexual union or erotic suggestion could be auspicious. I just wanted to examine a little bit about what is auspicious. So in Sanskrit, the words that closely relate to auspicious would be mangala or shubha. So this is shubha means it is often a prefix. It precedes another concept. So something like shubha muhurta would be an auspicious astrological conjunction, like an auspicious time according to astrology, or shubha kala, auspicious time. So shubha. And mangala being auspicious. So we know, those of you who study Odissi with me, you know we have the first choreography that is performed in a stage presentation or in our repertoire is Mangalacharan. Mangala being the auspicious. So it is an auspicious invocation dance, and we always do that dance first to call upon that auspicious energy, that benevolence. So events can be auspicious, and this is a very, rich cultural, really cultural discussion about Indian culture. So auspicious events could be like a birth, marriage, or puberty. Inauspicious event would be death, right? So auspiciousness could be linked to events, but also to objects or to actions, right? So certain objects like, like a fire is auspicious. It's because it embodies the god Agni. Other objects like a stone that looks like Ganesh could be viewed as auspicious because it has taken the form of Lord Ganesh. So embodying auspiciousness, these are emblems of auspiciousness. So we have probably the most auspicious emblem, I think you girls are going to like this, is Kanya or Nari, which is woman. It is not just the woman, but the fertile woman. Another emblem of auspiciousness, in contrast, would be like a king, Raja. So the king is an auspicious emblem for society. So the union of male and female is often interpreted as signifying a stable state of auspiciousness. And this is why it is celebrated in various arts like sculpture and painting. And so why you can find the union of male and female carved onto the sides of temple walls. And also, I'm drawing from a really interesting book. It's a whole nother topic. This book is called The Gods of the... No, sorry. I got that wrong. The Wives of the God King. Wives of the God King. This is a book on of research by a scholar who researched the Maharis or the Devadasis of the Jagannath temple in Puri, which is the temple and the tradition which links to our dance Odissi. I have a lot to say about that book. I don't agree with everything in the book, but anyway, it's another subject. But she focused a lot on the traditions. So in the topic of Devadasis, we know that it's linked to prostitution. That's a huge topic, but the fact is that there is some truth in that, and each tradition, each period in history has a very different story. But in the tradition of the Jagannath temple, there is some tradition throughout that history where the Devadasis or the Maharis who were viewed as incredibly auspicious because they're fertile women, they engaged in erotic pastimes with various people such as the king. So that act was considered to bring a stability of auspiciousness to society. So it was an act to bring fertility and abundance to the greater society. So that's quite an extreme example. But even in the simple example of like referring to shringara rasa, the slightly romantic atmosphere, right? We don't have to, something can be romantic without being directly sexual, right? It can just lightly suggest something like springtime. It's very innocent and it's very lovely and pleasant. It's not like a storm in the winter. So this also shows that subtle suggestion of shringara rasa. Shringara rasa is linked with vasanta, the springtime. That suggestion of love, that very subtle, far-off suggestion of romance, subtly suggests fertility, which subtly suggests auspiciousness and abundance, right? So it doesn't have to be so literal as in, you know, that example of the Devadasi tradition. But you can see how it kind of links into a mode of thinking. So speaking of fertility, fertility is creativity. It's creation, right? That's why back at the beginning of class I said shringara rasa it gives birth to all other rasa. It is creation. Fertility is creation, creativity. It is potentiality. I love that. It's full of potential. That's the meaning of fertility. So rasa is, I think of rasa as the same thing. When we really analyze the experience of rasa, it's full of potential. Because remember that Indian art suggests, it doesn't just lay it all out there and then the story's over. It suggests and it tempts you to unravel, right? This is potentiality. And I think because it's so subjective, I'm talking about rasa. Rasa is so subjective. It's so difficult to define and to pin down. You can't, save rasa in a jar for later. It's like something you can't really control. But almost that's why it's so tantalizing. It's why we like it so much. Because that means it keeps its potentiality. So fertility and potentiality. So this same potentiality is experienced in the quest for the absolute, which again we keep coming back to is the point of all art in India, is somehow experiencing the absolute and that union. So when we study philosophy and we have this almost like a recollection of truth, when we, in these theory classes, this is philosophy we're talking about. Sometimes we bring it down to really concrete examples, but we are speaking in very philosophical terms. And the thing about philosophy is it also is full of potentiality because it's something which is beyond the material. So it is full of potential. this fullness, this possibility of remembering the true state, remembering the absolute, or reuniting with the absolute, this potentiality that is fertility expressed through a woman, is a common theme in Indian art. So why these voluptuous women are carved on the outside of temples, or particularly at the entrance of a temple, especially in South India. If any of you have been to some of the really big, remarkable temples in like Tamil Nadu, always in the gateway, in the gopuram that you enter, you can see on the side there's voluptuous women holding vines, kind of standing in these voluptuous poses. And why is it that women were dancing in this way in front of the altar of God? What is it about the sign of the woman that is so holy, or so so frequently used in the religious context? And it is this fertility, this creativity, this potentiality that the woman represents. So we see it often in painting, also in dance. The symbol of a woman with a water pot is like one of my favorite images, probably because I'm a Rajasthani girl, and back in the days when I first came to Rajasthan, you could still see women walking from the well with a water pot on their head and their hips swaying side to side. And, there's like, it's not like actually a quote people say or some verse somebody says, but there's this understanding in Rajasthan that Rajasthani dance comes from that vision of like watching a woman walk from the well with her hips swaying and holding that full water pot. And the fullness of that she's bringing water to her family to keep her family alive. And the roundness of her body, all of this is the symbol of like, she is the one who gives life. She is the creative force. She is the potentiality. She is what gives the family life itself. So it's a very sensuous suggestion, but that sensuality is full of auspiciousness. So something like a sidelong glance, another symbol of femininity, and femininity suggesting fertility. So that sidelong glance, that suggestion of union, or that's, the suggestion of union, I think. I don't think I need to add more to that. If the right person has ever looked at you out of the corner of their eye, you know what I'm talking about. That's the end of the story. Okay, so the young bride, the ultimate symbol of fertility. I am a jewelry lover. I absolutely love jewelry. I love Indian jewelry, and it's part of the reason why I moved to India, so I could just wear jewelry all the time and buy jewelry all the time and sell jewelry. For those of you who don't know, I have a jewelry company, and I just love the jewelry. And I think it's fascinating. I also give some lectures about the aesthetics of adornment in India. It's fascinating because each and every item is symbolic, but the general symbolism of ornamentation, it was written in the Natya Shastra that jewelry increases shringara rasa. Okay. So even in the ancient texts about aesthetics, jewelry is so important. So when you're married in India, which I just happened to have experienced not even 2 years ago, less than 2 years ago, the bride should be heavily adorned, and this is written in the Vedas. I went through a very, very traditional, ultra traditional Vedic wedding ceremony that even some of my Indian friends were like, oh, wow. It's very traditional. My guru arranged everything, and we were married in an ashram, and I was kind of imagining like I would wear my white cotton sari and we would kind of sit in meditation. And because I've been to a lot of Indian weddings, but I just thought in an ashram, it's going to be, modest. all the monks were like, oh no, you need a new pair of earrings. Oh no, you need a tika. Oh no, you need a nut. Oh no, you need to get your wife some bangles. So they made Matthew go out and buy me a ton of gold jewelry. Um, so the priests wouldn't marry me unless I had gold on my forehead, on my nose, and all of this ornamentation is a symbol, is a really strong and powerful symbol of fertility, abundance, creativity, potentiality. I always think of it in these terms, like the well-adorned bride means she's ready. Oh, look at that. Thanks, Samuele. He brought me a coffee. Italia. Probably because he just heard me praising him. Okay, so the adornment means she's ready. This is like when the woman is full, the maximum full of her potentiality, of her creative potential. So that's why you see, I don't know, like if your Indian friend invites you to their wedding, you go to an Indian wedding and you're not adorned enough, people kind of say like, oh no honey, here, just put this jewelry on, because it's not auspicious for a woman not to be adorned, because it's this ornamentation that suggests the fullness of the ripeness of femininity, and shringara rasa. So it's why a widow is viewed as inauspicious, and why there's like, if you watch Bollywood, the classic scene of like, okay, oh, my husband died, and then there's like, they break their glass bangles and start crying and throw herself and rip all the jewelry off of her body, because when a woman becomes a widow, she should not adorn herself, because she is not the emblem of auspiciousness and readiness and fertility. So it's interesting symbolism there. So creativity and fertility are viewed as the sexual nature, right? The sensuous nature. And so we talked about in a theory class, the first theory class I did in this lockdown period was on Navratri, and we talked about Navratri is the festival of Durga, and we talked about Devi. I read from Devi Gita, and it was actually describing Bhuvaneshwari, very auspicious, benevolent aspect of Devi. And it described Bhuvaneshwari and her ornaments and what she looked like. And it describes Devi in Shringara Rasa. So God herself is in Shringara Rasa. This is very auspicious, because when we think of, I was raised Catholic. The God that I was told about as a child was definitely not in Shringara Rasa. It was like, I remember my first communion, and I said to the priest, but I was like 10 years old, but I haven't sinned yet. I don't think I've done anything wrong. And they said, you better go home and think about it, because I'm sure you've done something wrong. And I just remember feeling like, maybe I should do something wrong, because I have to go to confession. Very different rasa, okay? Very different rasa, very different bhava. And now we think about Devi with her sidelong glance, her gold ornamentation, her full, almost exploding breasts. She is the emblem of Shringara Rasa. She is full of potentiality. She is creativity herself, right? Life itself. She is the woman with a full water pot, bringing her family water. So this is Lakshmi. Lakshmi is the goddess of abundance, fertility. So my point of bringing all this in is that what might be viewed as like, if you go to a temple in India and you see a woman's bare breast, voluptuous body carved on the outside of a very holy site, the Christian worldview would say, oh, this profanity, this is so vulgar, this is horrific, this is sin in where they call to be a place of God. Very different viewpoint, very different symbolism, because that voluptuous female body to the Christian represents the what is it, the first sin, right? The Adam and Eve. So very different symbolism, very different suggestion in using this iconography or using this, these ideas or these scenes in art. It suggests a very different thing. So speaking specifically about sexuality as a part of Shringara Rasa. So as I mentioned, Shringara, like anything in life, it can have degrees. It doesn't always mean like the sexual act, but certainly it suggests the act of creation, right? And Shringara is often defined as love including passion and the physical aspect of love. So artistically speaking, in India, its sexuality is very natural and very appropriate to use in art, to discuss in art, or even to discuss in spiritual philosophy. It's a very natural thing. It is creation, right? So even to suggest Shringara Rasa, to, not to describe the act of union, but just to suggest it is very appropriate. It's very auspicious. It's auspicious, meaning full of life, full of potentiality. So in the Indian thought, in this Vedic thought, sexuality is responsible for life itself, right? It is the act of creation. So it must also have its origins in the divine realm as well, because everything is viewed as the micro and the macro. So it's important. What I really appreciate and respect about what Susan Schwartz is mentioning when she talks about Shringara Rasa is that she makes it very clear that promiscuity, to be promiscuous, has never been widely practiced in India. And I think it's easy to get confused about that because it's widely practiced in other parts of the world. But promiscuity has never been widely practiced in India, not really to the extent that it has in other cultures. And the acknowledgement of the inherent power of sexuality does not require a behavioral response. It does not, just because a culture identifies the power, the auspiciousness, the poetry, the importance of sexuality, doesn't mean that everybody has to behave over sexually, right? So that's, I think, really, really important to point out, because that can be confused, because we have, for example, in my country of origin, I would classify it as pretty promiscuous and culturally. So in my generation compared to my mom's generation, and even generations after me, it's very promiscuous culture. But is sexuality viewed and acknowledged for its inherent power? I would say less so than a less promiscuous culture, such as, for example, India, or for example, Thailand, or some culture that has a little bit more of that Vedic worldview kind of wrapped around the concept of sensuality and sexuality. So the nature of the physical is viewed in a particular way in Vedic thought. And sexuality is very much the physical nature. So we know this. By this physical nature, I mean we're coming back to a term like Maya, but also to a term as in Lila. So Lila we hear more in the Vaishnav context, and that is Lila means play, the divine play, and usually referring to the playfulness of Krishna. Very playful God. And so how that play, just like a play, as in we study the Natya Shastra and we direct, produce, and star in a play, that it's not real, that it's a way of experimenting and experiencing rasa, and learning on this spiritual journey through life, but it's not real. So it's also mentioned, Susan Schwartz also mentions, and I think it's true, and I can think of a few examples, although we won't go into them, but Indian culture also has an appreciation and a sense of humor for sexuality as expressed between the gods. So last year I was reading a book called Ka. I think maybe some of you have read it. It was, he's Italian. What's his name? Julia. Great Italian scholar. Anyway, very famous book, Ka, and it's pretty bizarre, I have to say. I mean, I'm kind of a diehard India culture girl, but it was a bit far stretched for me. But it's about Vedic and Puranic stories about the gods, and he presents them in kind of a weird way, but super sexual and super hysterical situations between mostly Shiva and Parvati and their sexual escapades. Needless to say, they have a great sense of humor about it. Okay, so we cannot talk about Shringara Rasa without mentioning Krishna, and we did a little bit in the last class. And I mentioned in the last class that he is the Rasa Raja. Rasa Raja means he is the... Thanks, Sonia. That was his name. Rasa Raja is the king of rasa. And I read to you a little bit from Aesthetic Vedanta, explaining this dualistic vision. And so I definitely suggest this book, Aesthetic Vedanta, especially now because I gave it to you. You have no excuse. You have to read it now. It's a free PDF. You can download it and read it on your iPad. It's a wonderful book to get more into this Vaishnav perspective. So let's talk about Vaishnavism to start to contextualize the conversation about Shringara Rasa. So Vaishnavism is... we started the theory class more focused on Advaita Vedanta, the non-dualistic philosophy of Brahman, the eternal supreme reality or truth or ever-present divine force, whatever you want to call it. And now Vaishnavism is categorized as qualified non-dualism. So that's a fancy word for saying basically it's basically we're starting to separate things out. It's not Brahman is all one. We start to find a division. It ranges in its philosophical base, Vaishnavism, but basically Vaishnavism is a, let's just call it for sake of ease and conversation, a religion, an aspect of Vedic thought, which focuses on devotion towards an avatar of Vishnu. So Vishnu being a supreme manifestation of Brahman. Okay? So the key texts in Vaishnavism are certainly the Vedas, the Upanishads, and then very important is Bhagavad Gita and Bhagavata Purana. So Vaishnavism is based on Vishnu being the form which is worshipped, except Vishnu has many different forms, just to confuse some of you entering into this field even more. So Vaishnavism is based on an avatar doctrine, we can say, which recognizes many forms of Vishnu. Okay, so we have like the Dasavatar, the 10 avatars of Vishnu. We have Vishnu in the form of Ram, Lord Ram from the Ramayana, Krishna, Jagannath, and so on. There are independent traditions within Vaishnavism, or what we call sampradayas. They're kind of like schools within Vaishnavism. And so the one that we usually focus the most on, that I usually focus the most on, probably because of my experience of Indian art and, of course, Indian aesthetic theory from the perspective of Odissi. I'm an Odissi dancer, and our Odissi dance is linked with the Gaudiya Vaishnav tradition. So Gaudiya Vaishnav tradition, also known as Bengali Vaishnavism or Chaitanya Vaishnavism, is a sampradaya or religious movement inspired by Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. So he was a saint who kind of established this philosophy. So the focus of Gaudiya Vaishnavism is devotional worship, which is known, many of you know it in the yoga world as bhakti yoga. So bhakti is devotion, and it is bhakti yoga or devotional worship directed towards Radha and Krishna. And we've kind of talked about how this idea of Krishna from his heart manifests Radha. So she is separate, although she is not separate. She is him. So this religious tradition was important in, or kind of developed out of, the Bhakti movement. And so the Bhakti movement was a late medieval period that started around the 7th century and kind of was growing and developing until after the 12th century. And let's see. So we mentioned Chaitanya Mahaprabhu as being one of the instigators of this religious sampradaya. After Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, he had some disciples, and there is a very important. There was, let me see, was it eight Goswamis, I believe? I think it was 8 Goswamis, which are 6 Goswamis of Vrindavan. So these were like the 6 main disciples of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, this incredible bhakti saint. And one of them, his name was Rupa Goswami. All of them were incredible and did the work of scribing and formulating this philosophy. So Rupa Goswami, it's an interesting name to write down because you can find wonderful texts that he is attributed to, but of course he was just scribing down the teachings of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. So Rupa Goswami lived around the late 1400s, early half of the 1500s. He was a poet and philosopher of the Gaudiya Vaishnava tradition, and he wrote one important text called Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu. Beautiful book. You can download it for free, I'm sure, on many websites. Translates as the ocean of nectar of divine love. And if you don't want to take a swim in that ocean, I don't know what to say. Beautiful. Even just the name of the book is beautiful. Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu. So bhakti we know is devotion. Rasa, Rasamrita. Amrita is like the nectar of eternal life. Sindhu is the ocean. Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu. So this was one of the very important texts that he wrote that kind of defines this philosophy in Vaishnavism, which is really interesting for our study about rasa, because basically, to summarize what Rupa Goswami did, is he took the teachings of the Natya Shastra, okay? Natya Shastra, a text on dance and drama and art. He took the theory of bhava and rasa and applied it to this emerging religion or spiritual sampradaya, this religious tradition. So what's fascinating to me is that this entire religion is based on art. I mean, it's amazing. It's based on art. And so the very groundwork of the spiritual philosophy is using this theory of bhava and rasa, which is the very theory of art, So guess what happens down the line when this philosophy develops? Well, many artistic practices are nurtured through this new religious wave that's happening. So all of the things which we've talked about to experience in rasa and to become a better artist, and how art helps you to achieve the supreme, this entire religious viewpoint, the Gaudiya Vaishnava tradition, is based on singing the name of the Lord, dancing, acting, painting the form. It's all about that beautiful, celebrating that beautiful intoxication that we feel through art. That through art we can experience and reach the divine and unite once again with the divine. We can experience Shringara Rasa. So the idea is to reunite with, as Radha unites with Krishna, is to unite with the beloved. It's not to become Krishna. That's not the goal of this religious path, but it is to be the close lover of Krishna, right? So the whole medium of spiritual attainment is Shringara Rasa. Let me say that again. The medium of the spiritual experience is Shringara Rasa. So the more you love Krishna, the more intimate, the more united, this is the goal, right? So the Gaudiya Vaishnava tradition connects to Odissi, in so many ways, but just quickly let me point out why we talk about it in relationship to Odissi. There's some very concrete points, and then there's certainly more abstract aesthetic points. So historically, Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, the bliss intoxicated saint of Bengal who established Gaudiya Vaishnavism, he himself was, at some point in his life, he went to the Jagannath temple in Puri, and he was on the steps of the Jagannath temple, going into samadhi, singing the praise of Jagannath. So this incredible devotion, it brought this, what we know as the bhakti movement. So the bhakti movement was brought to the steps of the Jagannath temple. Jagannath is an aspect of Krishna. Jagannath is Krishna. He is Vishnu. So worshipping, singing the praise of Krishna is singing the praise of Jagannath. So Chaitanya Mahaprabhu brought this tradition about, and certainly that had a strong influence on the artistic traditions around the Jagannath temple and the resurgence of dancers and musicians using art as a means of worship within the Jagannath temple. Odissi comes from the Devadasi or the Mahari tradition of the Jagannath temple. That is where our dance finds its origin. Also, another concrete point is the fact that if you study Odissi with me, we study the lineage of Guru Kelucharan Mohapatra, and he was a very devotional man. He specifically grew up in a Vaishnav environment, and we know, especially those of you who were at school this year, we went through in theory class some of his life history and how he practiced the art of transcendental theater known as the Raslila practice of an ashram which was just a few doors down from the Jagannath temple. So our guru who created all of our choreographies which we practice was practicing this devotional abhinaya, not necessarily as a stage performer, although they did perform it on stage, but it was considered a very deep meditation, a very religious act, a very spiritual act. And so the tradition is just absolutely integrated. It's like the life breath of our Odissi. Okay, so within the philosophy of the Gaudiya Vaishnavas, I started this last class, and I wanted to kind of come back to it. The stages of love. So this is like an excerpt from the philosophy that was developed by the 6 Goswamis of Vrindavan to express how one progresses in this spiritual path of shringara rasa, bhakti rasa. Bhakti, devotion, remember, comes from shringara. So basically, shringara rasa is like, it's like the path or the space in which this whole religious and spiritual experience of the Gaudiya Vaishnavas takes place. And shringara is love. Love, as we know, we defined early on, has 2 parts. So it is defined by attraction. There can be no attraction without separation. So interesting how we just keep coming to this. Okay, so talking about the stages of love, this is not my opinion. I'm reading to you what is elaborated in the Gaudiya Vaishnav philosophy. First stage, Shanta Bhava. Shanta Bhava is loving God as the supreme governor. And to me, I really think about this like in a kind of a more Vedantic perspective, like that peace that you find in just a simple meditation and feeling that ever presence, not particularly drawn into form of God, I would say, if that makes sense. Okay, then the next stage of love, Dasya Bhava. Dasya is loving God as the master, so being the servant of God. And a great example of this is Hanuman. Hanuman has Dasya Bhava. Hanuman is the great servant of Lord Ram, the most loyal devotee. He's so sincere in how he serves Ram. He would do anything to serve Ram. And so it's considered that this marks the beginning of the path of love. So next stage would be Sakya Bhava. Sakya Bhava is loving God as a close friend or a confidant. So this is a little bit more like the relationship between Krishna and Arjuna. Certainly they're not exactly equal, but definitely there's a confidence between them. There's a mutual respect between them, almost like a camaraderie or brotherly love between them. And I also think of like the Sakhi in the case of, for example, in the Gita Govind, if you're familiar with the stories of the Sakhi is the friend of Radha who's constantly the go-between between Krishna and Radha, trying to kind of mend their relationship, the messenger. Okay, then the next stage of love, Vatsalya Bhava, loving God as your child. And so this is like the relationship between Yashoda and Krishna. So probably the cutest thing on the planet is going to auntie's house, some little auntie's house, little old lady in Orissa, and she's so old, but she has this little baby Krishna on the altar, and she talks to her baby Krishna like he's a naughty baby. I know some devotees of Jagannath, usually they're only ones I know are like old ladies. Oh, Jagannath, you've made a mess of the house. What have you done today? Like kind of scolding Jagannath. And this relationship, which you see, in India, like worshiping baby Krishna as the supreme. So sweet. Okay, and then the next stage, Kanta Bhava. So loving God as husband and wife. A dutiful and close relationship, and this is the great example, of course, is Sita and Ram. Sita and Ram's relationship, Sita being the great, really, I mean, obviously Ram is God and Ram is kind of the hero, but Sita in the sense is the hero in that relationship, just like Radha kind of being the ultimate example. So Sita is considered the ultimate example of how to behave in this bhava. And then the last stage of love, as the teachings go, is Madhurya Bhav. loving God as your beloved, the highest of all. And this is the love between Radha and Krishna. So if you remember that beautiful poem I read you in the last class, don't, Radha, don't say you and I. It's like, don't even separate us grammatically. It's so cute. So sweet. Like, it's just, it's painful for Krishna to hear the words you and I. We are one. You know, it's this is Madhurya Bhava. So there was a wonderful question that came in after I mentioned this in the last theory class, and it was a question by a mother, and I was so touched by this question. And the question was, I am a mother, and I have to say, basically what I kind of got from this was like, okay, men have come and gone in my life, but my child is the highest form of love that there is. And like, it brought tears to my eyes because yeah, it's true. It's true. I mean, that's absolutely true. And certainly I am not like, you know, I would never want to take that experience from anyone, even in just presenting a philosophy in class. That is absolutely real experience. But have we merged with the divine yet? We don't know what the highest love is. I mean, I don't know. I hope you all have attained the ultimate liberation and you are liberated souls, but probably most of us are still working on just controlling the fluctuations of our mind. But we are on the path, and these are teachings to progress you along the path and suggest ways of progressing along the path. And the beauty of Vedic thought and Vedic philosophy is there's so many options to take. I mean, this Gaudiya Vaishnava philosophy, it's like totally different path than Advaita Vedanta, which I started this series with. Almost for a specific reason, because if we start to get, you know, if I just like take you, I don't know where you're at, you're in London, and I just drop you right down in Vrindavan, right in between an argument between Radha and Krishna, you're just not gonna accept it. It's just a little bit too far from what we are maybe culturally used to, or just in this modern reality, what we're used to. The Gaudiya Vaishnava perspective is so intricate, and there's a certain way to enter into it. And I definitely think entering through something as fundamental as Advaita Vedanta and concepts like breaking down the concept of rasa is just, it sets you up to be able to accept this world of shringara rasa that is so loaded with sensuous symbolism, right? Which we're like, wait a second, that's profanity. No, it's not. It's creation, it's fertility, it's potentiality, right? So there's a lot. The more I teach these subjects, the more I'm like, wait. The preparation is, so one thing I've been doing in the lockdown is, you know, we all probably signed up for a bunch of online classes, right? I signed up for like a degree program in Ayurveda because I'm like, hold on, I want to explain Krishna better. And in order to do that, I have to go all the way back to the foundation of reality. So I've been studying a lot of Advaita Vedanta and Ayurveda, and like explain spirit and the material world. And so I feel like you need so much preparation to get into these subjects. So yeah, so these are the stages of love mentioned in stages of Shringara Rasa, right? So I want you to notice that Shanta Bhava, Dasya Bhava, Sakya Bhava, Vatsalya Bhava, Kanta Bhava, Madhurya Bhava. These are stages of love. What is love? Shringara Rasa. Stages of Shringara Rasa. basically these different relationships are ways we can progress to the deeper experience of shringara rasa, which is just so interesting to me. It's like, here are we talking about art or are we talking about religion? We don't even know anymore. We're talking about Vedic art. So rasa is equally the element in love as it is in art. The specific definition of bhakti as an emotional religion of love is closely linked to the acceptance of bhakti as a rasa. According to the Gaudiya Vaishnava school, bhakti is a religious cult of love, an attachment towards a particular god, in this case Krishna. It is stipulated that bhakti, as love, is not possible without the presence of two entities, the love and the loved. Madhurya bhakti has been considered the highest category of bhakti rasa. So no other Sanskrit literature places quite as much importance on Shringara Rasa as the Gita Govind. So the Gita Govind is a very, very important text, and I'm about to share it with you. You can download this book of nectar for free, and this is absolutely 1,000% the recommended version. Do not ever pick up the version by Barbara Stoller Millers. It is the worst thing I've ever read in my life. She's a Sanskrit scholar and she doesn't know anything about love, I think. Sorry, that's not very nice to say. I'm sure she does. But she doesn't love Krishna, and you can tell. So that's the Barbara Stoller Miller is the most common copy. Like if for some reason you studied Gita Govind in a university, in a terribly boring university class, I'm sorry if you did, you probably had to buy her book. But we are not boring people. We are looking for nectar. So this version is written clearly by a highly realized, very sincere devotee of Lord Krishna. And I'm sorry, I can't remember which incredible Swami has written this book, but it's all the information is there. The praise of the lineage through which those teachings have been distilled. Something that's important to understand when you approach, you know, like if these classes are making you more curious about aesthetic theory, Vaishnav philosophy, Vedanta philosophy, when you search out materials to continue your study, please consider who has written that. Academics, or particularly like linguists, if it's a linguist who has analyzed Gita Govind, they're going to highlight certain parts of this book of devotional poetry, very different things than a devotee. A devotee of Lord Krishna could interpret the Gita Govind, absolutely, but a monk from a spiritual lineage linked to, in this case, the Gaudiya Vaishnava tradition, has an entire lineage pouring into them as they interpret the text. So when Chaitanya Mahaprabhu established this lineage, this viewpoint, generation after generation, this is what Guru Shishya Parampara is. It is a channel, a funnel. It is a network that collects more and more as time goes on. And that's why we tap into lineage. And actually, I'm going to take that back. I don't like to say tap in, because it's almost like suggesting it's a good idea to tap in and tap out. To allow yourself to become a link in the chain. So this translation of Gita Govind is written by, okay, I don't have my copy open. I feel bad I'm not quoting this person's name, but an entire teaching has been passed on with the knowledge that this person has. So as they learned Sanskrit, it was all in the context of realizing the highest in the Vaishnava philosophy. When this person studied the Gita Govind with a guru, living with a guru, living through that austerity, it's because a text like Gita Govind, Bhagavad Purana, Bhagavad Gita, there's the text, there's the words, and then there's the lineage that lives by that text. And in order to get the essence of the text, you have to enter into that lived field, if that makes sense. So if you pick up the Natya Shastra tomorrow and you start reading it, it's a lot of words without a lot of meaning unless you live amongst people who are living those teachings, so that you absorb this prana, this energy, the life of the teaching, what we call Guru Shakti. And Guru Shakti is something, I mean, it's why I've lived in India, why I decided to live in India, not just take a college class on Odissi, analyze it, and then move on. It's because I wanted this life breath inside of it. And so I just encourage you, as you're seeking out books about rasa or philosophy, just look at who has written it. Certainly if they come from a lineage, particularly a monastic lineage, I would recommend going with their version versus some scholar, although scholars sometimes have interesting viewpoints, but it's going to be more intellectual than lived. Yeah. Okay, so I think I'm going to end right around here, because what I have to talk about next is Rasa Leela, Gita Govind, and Springtime with Kamadev. So before I close the session, does anybody have any questions, any comments? I'll just wait a minute if anyone wants to type a question or a comment. I hope everybody read the newsletter we sent out. I think it was yesterday or the day before. There's some announcements, some online class links, and probably next week will be our last in this series of Indian aesthetic theory classes. Not the last one forevermore, just the beginning, but we'll kind of try to wrap up some thoughts in the next week. So please, if you have any questions or comments or something you want me to review or to clarify, then please let me know so I prepare that for next week. And yay, thank you. Enjoying to see me in the outside world. I know, although pretty much all of us, wherever we are, like I can't leave this garden, so I'm in the outside world, but somehow we're all still locked down. So but anyway, at least we're in springtime and I'm with my Krishna. Okay, so please read the newsletter if you haven't already, and we'll stay in touch. We have Indian Fusion Belly Dance on Saturday. Next week, we are doing Odissi. I have a free Odissi community class, so get ready. Get ready to join me. If you've never done Odissi, you're welcome to join. And I try to keep it as accessible as possible so you can just enjoy the experience. If you are a seasoned Odissi dancer, then just be ready to refine and hold your choka as long as you can. And yeah, and then we'll conclude our theory class series next week. Okay, sending you lots of love.